And good evening, Eternal Kernels. We welcome you to night 2 of our Eternal Kernel virtual pub crawl. And tonight, we will journey back in time to remember some of those historic night spots that students who were at EKU during the 1970s might remember. It's our little stroll down memory lane. We can't get together in person and we can't do an actual pub crawl, so we thought we would do a virtual pub crawl. Last night, we started in the 1960s and we talked about Specs and some of the music scene in the 1960s that started here in Madison County and grew out of Specs, and a lot of EKU students who remember those memories. Very pleased to have Billy Luxon and George Ridings and J.P. Pennington that joined us last night. So tonight we continue our journey moving into the 1970s, and tonight we're going to talk in our first hour about Poopeotzie's, Dirty Ernie's, the Bear and the Bull, and some of those spots that folks will remember. And then in hour 2, we're going to shift and talk a little bit about the Magic Moment, Zanzibar, and some other places that were more frequented by students of color who attended EKU in the 1970s. And we're going to talk a little bit with Howard Miller and Robert Blythe and Willie Jo Covington about how their experience at EKU in the 1970s might have been a little bit different than some of our other guests this week. So we've got a great night, 2 hours planned. We hope that you can stay with us for as much as possible. And I know I have heard a lot today from folks about, oh, you're not featuring my favorite bar, or you're not featuring a place that I used to go to. And obviously we only have so much time and we can only do so much. We're going to do our best to try to mention as many of the establishments and talk about them as we can. But with limited time, we could only feature certain places, and we try to hit some of the iconic ones. We talked to our alumni board members and got their feedback and tried to hit some of the spots that were the really popular spots, and we'll mention as many as we can. And obviously we can't get everybody in. I do want to let you know that we do have Eternal Kernel Pub Crawl shirts that are available. And we also would like to know where you are tonight as you're watching the stream. We ask you to go to alumni.eku.edu/pubcrawl and check in and let us know that you tuned in tonight. And also you'll get information there about how you can purchase one of our t-shirts and also how you can support our mission here at EKU by making a donation to the university if you would like. So we hope that you'll at least go in and register and let us know who's checking in tonight and who is with us. We also want to let those folks who are watching tonight on Facebook Live that we would love for this to be interactive. If you have memories from some of the places we're talking about, or have questions about a place maybe that you went to in the 1970s that we're not talking about, feel free to put those into the chat and we'll do our best to answer questions and try to hit some of the spots that you guys remember. If we're not doing it tonight, please put that in the chat and we'll do the best we can to try to get all that information in. We are very pleased in our first hour to have a couple of guests with us who I think we're going to find are very, very knowledgeable
about some of the establishments from downtown, and I'll let them get on here and defend themselves before I say too much. First up, a member of our EKU Alumni Board and a 1977 graduate of EKU from Northern Kentucky tonight in her home. We're very pleased to welcome Lucy Riffle to the Eternal Kernel Pub Crawl. Lucy, welcome.
Thanks, Dan. Glad to be here.
And our second guest tonight, he's very familiar with Poopeotzie's in particular because he was a bartender there. He's also an EKU graduate from 1987, but was in school in the 70s as well. We are pleased to have Brian Hotchkiss with us tonight. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan. Hi, Lucy.
Hi, B. How are you?
I'm good.
Now, you guys have a long-standing history, so let's go ahead and get that out in the open here first. Lucy, your roommate and Brian have a special, your ex-roommate from college and Brian have a relationship, is that right?
I had a roommate for 2 years in the dorm and 1 year in an apartment by the name of, at that time, Sandy Barnes, and she happens to be Brian's wife. They met while Brian was bartending at Poopeotzie's.
Yep. The first time we met was the Labor Day picnic '76 out at Boonesboro. It was the first time I met her, and then from there on, I'd see her at the bar every now and then. We play some backgammon over the years. We didn't get married or didn't even date till 13 years after that.
So it's a love story that is still going strong. You guys are still together, but we couldn't coax Sandy into getting on cam with you tonight, could we?
Nope, she just doesn't do that. She gets.
We understand. So here's kind of my goal tonight, and I like to start each session with kind of three main ideas in mind. First, obviously, I want to talk about Poopeotzie's, and I think Poopeotzie's is such a unique thing that we had here in Richmond and for EKU students for a lot of reasons, and we'll get into that. And then second, I want to talk about some of the other night spots that were in Richmond during that period. Obviously, even Specs kind of creeped into the 1970s before it switched names. And then lastly, I want to talk a little bit with each of you about your EKU experience and some of your memories of EKU during your days on campus. But we got to start with Poopeotzie's. And when you talk about Poopeotzie's, you've got to start with the guy who started it all, Jack Bricking. He was the owner, and he was kind of it was modeled after him, I guess you could say.
Even the logo was a picture of Jack. Of course, those of us who went frequently called him Poops. Many of us for a long time didn't even know what his name was, so he was just Poops. But Jack was quite the interesting character, a lot of fun to be around, and he kept the place hopping.
Yeah, he had
I think it's
got a master's degree in business from Eastern and worked at Specs, as a matter of fact, for 3 years. He was telling me this on Sunday. And decided, as much money as they were making, he could open his own and make just as much. So that's why he decided to open Poops. And where he got the name from, that was the name he and his brother called each other, so their parents didn't know they were calling each other MS.
So Poopeotzie's kind of was their substitute for it was a little bit cleaner version of what they would call each other.
Yeah.
Jack's still a character today, obviously, and I don't think he's probably changed a whole lot from his days back then. But the logo, and it's going to be on the shirt, but with the wild and crazy hair, was his hair that crazy back then?
Well, in the 70s, you have to remember that afros were in, especially for blacks, and Jack happened to have that curly hair that he could sport an afro very easily. So, yes, he had a big curly afro. The picture on the shirt was the way he looked.
So, Brian, you worked the bar, right? You were a bartender there?
At the second one, yeah. I started out as a bartender, and then after about 8 months, he made me the manager so he could travel and open other businesses. So I was a 20-year-old college student with a full-time load going a 3-point average, managing a bar. And over the weekend on the phone, he was telling me he put so much on my shoulders that didn't really feel that way. It was just, it was fun.
Now, you said the second location were there two locations of Poopeotzie's?
Yeah, the first one was right next door to the dog, and he leased it from State Bank. And they didn't renew his lease in fall of '76, so he had to close for a year. And that's when he moved up next to 1890s on First Street. I worked for him now.
Now, am I crazy? For some reason, I had a memory of Poopeotzie's being on 3rd Street, or that's where I'm crazy at. For some reason, I remember seeing the logo as a kid. And
it was it was right next to the family dog, former Specs, on the hill. And okay. when the Chase Bank tore it down, they put their parking lot that is there on that hill. And many of us laughingly sang the old Joni Mitchell song, They Paved Paradise and Put Up a Parking Lot, because they tore down our Poopeotzie's and made a parking lot where it was.
So that's probably what I remember. I've just got wrong side of 2nd Street. It was on 1st Street on the hill there, not on 3rd Street on the hill.
Right.
And was there a sign? For some reason, I remember a sign outside.
There was a sign in front of it, in front of the door.
Yeah.
And Brian wasn't the Go ahead, Brian.
He had a tear-em down party the last night. And the fire department cited him for having too many people, and he showed back up an hour later, said, "They can only cite tonight. Everybody get in here." And Lauren Pfeiffer was walking around with the women's toilet seat around her neck at about midnight.
Yep.
So what was it about Poopeotzie's? Tell us a little bit about the inside. When somebody walked in, what would they see? Because that was one of the things we talked about with Specs last night. It wasn't anything glamorous by any means. It resembled even a little bit of a warehouse when you walked in. What was the atmosphere in Poopeotzie's when you walked in?
Well, it, like Specs, was old. There was nothing fancy. It was a lot smaller than I call Specs the dog, the family dog. It was a lot smaller. Again, as they said last night, it was smoke-filled. Everybody smoked. But I think the atmosphere was always a family atmosphere. Everybody that came in there knew everyone else. And one of the things that I remember fondly is the pinball machines. I mean, we played pinball hour after hour after hour. And you know, besides the cheap beer, and again, it was a beer establishment, but you paid 50 cents to get in, and you got 2 of the wooden tokens that said Poopeotzie's Bar, and each one of them was good for a beer. And then after that, of course, you had to purchase your own. But it just was, there was nothing fancy about Poops at all. It was just a fun place to be.
Well, and Jack was part of that. So were the other guys who worked there. Mike Alley, Neil Mays, Dennis Lippy. Trying to remember some of the other ones. Because Lip's the one that told me when to go up to the second one and get a job, because I'd talked to Jack a couple times. He's like, "I don't think I really want a small bartender." And so I went up there, and there was only he and his ex-wife, Joy, up there cleaning this. And I walked in and goes, "I told you I don't think I'm going to use you." I said, "Give me one shift. If you don't like what I do, you send me away." I said, "But I have to ring separate than anybody else, so you know what I sell." And I sold twice what the other 2 people did. And he's like, "I guess I got to keep you, don't I?" Yep.
That's a good businessman right there. What about Candy Feather, Brian? Do you remember Candy Feather? She said that John Feather worked at Poopeotzie's and even lived above the bar, and that she and John met there and had been married for 44 years.
He was probably a little before me, because I got there in '76. The last year, the one was down by the dog. That was my sophomore year of college.
Well, and I talked to Jack over the weekend too, and he reminded me that Sally Hope and Danny Hope, Danny, the former football coach at EKU, they had their first date at Poopeotzie's.
And I noticed on the chat here that Sally's sister, who was Sandy and mine's other roommate, Susie, said hello. And Susie frequented the place a lot. And when Sally came to Eastern, She was Susie's little sister. So yes, if she went out with us, it was Poopeotzie's that we took her to. Hello, Sandy.
And there's Sandy. Someone else also commented that they thought the fire marshal limit for Poopeotzie's was 69 people, but that it was always far more than that.
It was always far more than that.
It was 65.
Yeah,
65.
Brian mentioned a few others. You know, one of my fond memories, and Sandy in the background will attest to this. I always had a crush on one of the managers for my years there, and that was Mike Alley. And the last I heard of Mike Alley, he was a flight nurse for UT Hospital.
Yeah, I heard he was a nurse.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of what makes some of these places so great, because so many people, you met so many people down there, and relationships and marriages and friendships that have lasted forever started at some of those famous places downtown where everybody would go and hang out.
And one of the things they mentioned last night that happened for me and Sandy and Susie and a few others that became such good friends is a lot of people still went home on weekends, but we did not. Now, Thursday night, you couldn't get near the bars. They came from Lexington. They came from Moorhead. They came from Trancey. Everybody came to Richmond on Thursday night. You tried not to schedule any classes early Friday morning because it was the happening place. But then a lot of people went home over the weekends. So downtown really on the weekends was people that got very close to each other because we didn't go home. And so we got to know each other even more, and we had a good cadre of people that stuck around on the weekends.
And during the summer.
Summers, obviously, a lot of the students are gone, but the students who were here were looking for things to do and had more time on their hands.
Mm-hmm.
We also had a comment made about some of the spring break parties, and that they even would put sand on the floor at Poopeotzie's for the spring break parties. Do you remember that?
Yes. And saw lots of people slip in the sand and have a few accidents.
And said they would flash the lights when they thought the cops were coming, that they would flash the lights to warn everybody.
Well, that and somebody at the door frequently watched up the hill. If you were looking at the front, it came down a hill to my left, and you watched up the hill because the police like to come down park up the hill and walk down and sneak in on you to catch those that were underage.
Yeah, now, and we learned last night at Specs, obviously, if you were underage, you could still get in, but they stamped you differently depending on what your age was. And so it was the same thing, I assume, at Poopeotzie's?
Yeah, red for underage, black for over. And
yeah.
The lights was the signal. Jack knew the police chief. He had actually worked at Specs with him. And you guys would be able to see the IDs better if I turned up the lights. So that they thought it was all good. But that was the signal to get an arm's length away from your beard.
Now, Specs, I understand, had a pretty good menu too, and they served food. Did Poopeotzie's have food too?
Just sub sandwiches and pretzels and popcorn.
I remember the pretzels is all I remember.
I remember the popcorn.
Yeah.
How long?
A T-shirt Jack's holding a sub sandwich.
Sub sandwich, yeah, I've seen that. So when did Poops open and when did it close?
It was open when I got there in 73.
I know it closed and then reopened in 77.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know how long it stayed open when it reopened in 77?
They were still going in 83 when I left town, so probably 87, 88 at latest probably.
Oh, wow. So that's a lot longer than I thought.
I think it was also the demise of the ABC agents that made the rules so tight that it was difficult to manage.
Yeah, and I assumed that Jack had it the whole time it was open. It was his bar.
He sold it to Robin Knapp in 77 or
77, 79.
79. He sold it to Robin Knapp. I went to work at Phone 3 with Robert.
Phone 3. We're going to talk more about Phone 3 tomorrow night when we get into the 80s. Now you mentioned Knapp. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other spots, and we'll come back to Poopeotzie's. But one of the other spots that I've heard some alums from the 70s mention is the Bear and the Bull. Was that going in the 70s?
Oh, yes. Go ahead, Brian.
I didn't know a whole lot about it because I was always working up the street. But I went
The
in
old
a few
Joni
times.
Mitchell song, they paved paradise and put up a parking lot because they tore down.
Uh-oh. Lucy,
Some
you
of my
came back on us
recordings
there.
coming back.
Yeah.
Hey, voice.
Yes, the Bear and the Bull was up the street a bit, but frequently, you know, especially if it got too crowded in one place, if it got, too crowded in Poopeotzie's, we'd grab a bunch of us together and we'd hike down the street and go into the Bear and the Bull. We didn't go to the Bear and the Bull as much because during the early 70s, again, like I said, I got there in 73, there were a lot of sorority and fraternity people that hung out there. And, I wasn't a member of a sorority. I was a little sister to a fraternity. But, so we'd go up and see some of my fraternity brothers up there. But it was mostly a frat bar. And so that wasn't the place we frequented a lot. We'd go up and say hello. But that wasn't we would usually stay with the Poopeotzie's or the family dog.
Yeah, I talked to Tim Brown this morning, and Tim was a student here in the 70s, played golf at EKU, and he mentioned one of the favorite places for the golf team to go was Dirty Ernie's.
Dirty Ernie's. That was another place that a lot of the athletes hung out at Dirty Ernie's. So, if we wanted to see the football players, or a lot of the athletes, we would go to Dirty Ernie's. And they actually would have music in there at times, and amateur night where people could sing. I never tried that, but.
All right, let's talk a little bit about obviously the pool hall. I think it was Shepherd's at the time. It later became Taylor's, but they were known for their great burgers and great food.
Shep's and Taylor's were two different places. Shep's was on Main Street, and Taylor's was on First Street. But,
right. Okay.
And I forget. I think it was at Specs was the one guy who'd sit there and smoke, and he'd have a 2-inch long cigarette ash standing over your burger.
Yeah, we always order it with no ashes, right?
Yeah.
And at the time that I was there, Shep's was not very female friendly. The women did not go into the pool hall. That was a place that the men went, and I was always jealous of them talking about the burgers when we weren't allowed in.
Yep, and we talked a little bit last night about the transition from Specs to the family dog, and there was something in between it. Was it already the dog by the time you guys had got there?
No, and now I can't remember what it was called, but it had a
Stakeout. Yeah, Stakeout.
That's it. It was the Stakeout in between Specs and when I first got there was Stakeout, but I think in 74 it changed to the dog. It was not Stakeout long.
Yeah. And so the dog was still there, Lucy, while you were there?
Absolutely. And it was still there when I graduated. But that's where we went to hear Exile and the other bands. We heard the Maroons and Exile. It was fun listening to them last night because we actually would go down there to hear the live music.
Yeah.
And sometimes even for the dog, they'd be lined up all the way down the street. I mean, you had to wait, at least at Poopeotzie's, you may wait 5 or 10 people to get in because we just crowded in there. But at the dog, they kind of kept an eye on the number allowed in the building. And so you would have to wait in line till somebody left before you could get in.
Yeah, they calculate that by 15 square feet per person, a 3 by 5 square rectangle. And that's how the fire department calculated your occupancy limit.
Mm-hmm.
And now, Lucy, you said you lived on campus for a couple of years and then you moved off. And I understand you even made sure you got an apartment downtown so you guys could be closer to Poopeotzie's.
Sandy and I had an apartment that was 2 blocks away from Poopeotzie's, right off of Main Street. If I don't even know if it's still there, but there was a drive-through dry cleaners right next to the old courthouse. At that time, it was still the courthouse and had the jail in the basement. And if you drove through that drive-through, in the middle of the block, there was one concrete block building. It had an upstairs apartment and a downstairs apartment. And we had the downstairs apartment, 2 bedrooms for 4 girls, but we never had to move our car on the weekends. We could walk downtown and walk home. That was before the days you worried about DUIs, but we didn't want to be behind the wheel if we'd been downtown. So, yeah, we were able to walk to and from our fun.
My first 2 years working for Jack, I lived above the bike shop. Right there on 2nd Street as you came down from campus, the bike shop was up on the left.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I lived the first 2 years I worked for Jack.
And Jack, we understand and there's a note here, Jack came here from Bellevue, Kentucky, and he was in school from 64 to 67, got his undergraduate, and then got an MBA in 69 from EKU. So Jack's a 2-time graduate and
Right.
obviously still around and still involved and still comes to a lot of our alumni events. And I think there are a lot of people who still call Jack Poopeotzie.
Yeah, he's Poops. I have a funny story about Jack and one of my experiences at Poopeotzie's one night. I happened to be sitting, as I said, at the front door with Mike Alley as he was working the door, taking the money. And honest to goodness, I was not drinking that night because I didn't feel good from the night before, I'll admit. But I wasn't 21. And I was sitting at the door and a huge crowd came down the hill. And Mike handed me his beer to set on the cigarette machine because he was going to have to check everybody in. So I took his beer from him and turned around and sat it on the cigarette machine next to me. And with that, a police officer walked in the door and asked for my ID. Well, I wasn't 21, so he actually took me in along with a whole car full of people. I got down there and I was sober as a judge. And I was like, I am not drinking. And well, we saw you in possession of alcohol. Well, the next thing I know, I heard Sandy and a few of my roommates out in the front lobby. Jack had sent them down with quarters to pay because that's what they took. Everybody paid in quarters coming in, and sent them down with quarters to pay my bail to get me out. And then went with me to court and questioned the officer if he had seen me take a drink. And the officer admitted no, he had not. And the judge dismissed it.
Justice prevails.
Justice prevails. But my roommates who were out in the front lobby had been drinking, and I was afraid they were going to keep them, but they didn't. They took their money and let me go.
So how much was bail in those days if you have to pay it in quarters, especially?
Oh, I don't know. It was like $25 or something. It was not a great amount, but.
And you mentioned the tokens earlier. What was admission to get into Poopeotzie's? 25 cents? 50 cents?
2 tokens, each was good for a quarter. So you get a bottle beer with 2 of them, or a draft beer with 1 of them, or half a pitcher and put another 50 cents in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, somebody also asked about, and you guys may or may not remember this, kissing contests at Poopeotzie's. Do you remember anything about kissing contests?
No, I don't remember that, but nothing surprises me.
I believe that. Well, we talked about Ernie's, we talked about the Bear and the Bull, we talked about Poopeotzie's. Are there any other places, obviously the dog, but any other places that we haven't mentioned that you guys remember as kind of being hot spots for students back in those days?
Well, we used to go down on Main Street to O'Reilly's, and I believe, Sandy, you have to confirm this. I think O'Reilly's was the one that had the lighted dance floor. Was that O'Reilly's? And so we would go down there, and of course that was during disco days where they had all the colored lights flashing on the dance floor, and that's where we would go dancing, was down at O'Reilly's.
Yeah, and I remember O'Reilly's. It was open for a long time. Mark Kokenauer had
Mhm.
O'Reilly's,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where Paddy Wagon is now, right?
Right. Right.
Um,
And then, of course, a place that's open today, Madison Gardens, I actually met one of the owners because he frequented Poopeotzie's and the Dog. And he was a bartender for a long time at the Dog, Tom Philman. And so Tom was there back when I was there, and it was after I'd graduated that they went into business and opened Madison Gardens. But Tom was in school then and was a bartender at the Dog and frequented Poopeotzie's and was part of our running around gang.
Yeah, he was part of the summer crowd that we played jungle volleyball with. As long as he didn't bleed or die, at this point.
Yeah, I remember Tom and Steve have told me stories about they used to work at Big Daddy Liquor, which was right in front of where Madison Gardens is now. It's
Right.
the Chamber of Commerce building now. And they had worked there when they were students. And of course, Tom and Steve in Madison Gardens still going strong after all these years. And it's changed a lot from what I hear from its early days. I think in its early days, people would say it was a little bit of a biker bar, a little bit rougher. And then as it went on, it kind of changed a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It was quick rubber. With Tom and Steve there, the bikers didn't pull anything.
Right. And another place that we used to make our rounds to, we would, Sandy and I and a few other girlfriends would walk the circuit, but we'd also stop at Sutter's Mill, Jay Sutter's Mill. And that was another place that, we'd stop at. And it was kind of like your old high school days when you drove your highway in town. We just walked from bar to bar in town just to see who we could find where. And, we'd always start and end up at Poopeotzie's. But we would frequent the others just to check out what was happening and who was there.
Now, what about 1890s? 1890s was on First Street. Was that open when you guys were around, or did that come along in the 80s?
It
was open. Yeah, it was open in 77.
No, see, that's the year I graduated, so I didn't remember 1890s.
77. They served beer in mason jars, had backgammon tables, couches in the back part of the bar.
Yeah, somebody even asked if we knew what was on tap at 1890s and 1977.
No. I Poops at Fall City.
And Poops also had PBR, because I always drank PBR.
Well, and it's interesting over the years how some of the beers have changed. I mean, some of the beers they talked about last night from Specs, you can't even find anymore. So
Wiedemann, Schlitz,
Hudipole. I remember
Right.
Hudipole as a kid.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about what EKU was like back in those days. And, I think that's one of the fun things for me now working in alumni engagement is I think through the decades, everybody had a little bit different experience at Eastern because Eastern changes a little bit as you go on. And obviously, if you've been to campus lately, it doesn't look much at all like it did in the 1970s. And It doesn't look much like it did in the 80s or 90s even. It continues to change. So just talk a little bit about some of your fond memories and favorite places on campus back in your days here.
I spent most of my time in the business building, on Combs building, and got to know the football players real well because most of them took business classes. And we didn't really have bouncers at the second Poopeotzie, so I'd have to tell the guys, football players, you can drink for half price as long as nobody touches me. And just separate them out the door. Because I'm only 150 now, but I was only like 135 pounds back then. And so they more than happy did it. We never had any fights. But I got to know the football team real well, and that was when we were winning championships. And won a championship, finished second, won a championship 4 consecutive years.
Yeah.
I had a lot of friends on the football team, and they came in the bar quite often.
You should talk about streaking in the ring.
I didn't.
Yeah.
And
I think I heard her talk.
during my
Sandy mentioned the streaking and the ravine, right?
Yeah, that's what Sandy was bringing up. I didn't participate in that because I was at work.
Lucy, did you freeze on us?
am I back?
Yeah,
I
you're
don't know
back now.
what's happening here. We also spent a lot of time in the PAL building playing euchre. There was always a euchre game going, and you stopped in there, got yourself something to eat at the grill, and could get in a euchre game and watch your watch. And when it was time to leave for class, there was always somebody coming in, and they would just join the game, take your spot and join the game. So it was just a perpetual euchre game going on in the PAL building. But yes, in 73, 74, we had streaking in the ravine, and had panty raids out of the girls' dorms. A lot of craziness going on, but we also had a really fun time. Good concerts at Alumni Coliseum. I can remember lots of good concerts and a lot of fun. And again, on the weekends, it got to be kind of a ghost town. But those of us who stayed around, everybody knew everyone.
Yeah.
And to this day, I'll recognize faces. I may not know the names, but I'll say, "Were you at Eastern?" And 73 to 77, because everybody knew everybody.
Yeah, the concerts. I saw Jimmy Buffett and John Torian for like $5.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing that's definitely changed is what it costs to see a concert. And back then, and a lot of people don't even remember this, but there was a bowling alley in Powell, right?
Yep.
Absolutely. I took bowling as one of my PE courses, golf and bowling. And the golf was up at the Married Housing Field, which is now a parking lot by Alumni Coliseum. There was a big intramural field up there, and they would try to teach us golf up there before we would actually get to go to the golf course and play. And the students' biggest goal was to see if we could hit any of the Married Housing trailers with our golf balls, because they were owned by the university, and if we broke anything, the university had to pay for it. The people living there weren't out anything. So that was our fun, to see if we could hit a drive long enough to hit one of the trailers for the Married Housing.
And was that over behind like the nursing building, where I remember a bunch of trailers?
Yes,
being
they
over
were
there
behind the nursing building, where the nursing building is now. Yes,
yeah,
and that was Married Housing back in those days.
Yeah.
I also enjoyed intramural sports back then. I got to play flag football with a bunch of guys. The pit team. We were called a pit crew, professional intramural teams, but we were just a bunch of guys that liked to hang out. We'd drink beer and then go play. We went undefeated for 2 years, which was real fun. We went to the national championships in New Orleans one year.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I hear a lot of people talk about was getting involved in club sports and intramural sports when they were here, and how much fun they had. And that's a way you can have a good time and never have to leave campus, which is even better. And obviously now you come to campus and you see the fabulous new rec center, and it's just a completely different world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But we had as many students that went and watched the intramural football games as went to the regular football games. I mean, there was quite a crowd. We'd all go up and watch them play.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit. Who was president? Were you Martin was out and J.C. Powell was in, or did you get a little bit of both?
Bob Martin was there when I came. And a funny story, my father and Bob Martin were at Eastern together. And so when my dad brought me to Eastern, he made sure and took me to the president's house and introduced me and said, if you have any problems, this is the man to see. Because my father also was in the Army Air Corps with President Martin, and said at that time he happened to have a little difficulty and would like to get into scuffles with the other servicemen, and Dad was always bailing him out. They were pretty good friends from college. So he said he owes me some. So if you have any problems, you contact him. And then my last year is when President Powell came in.
Right.
Yeah. You're lucky that it wasn't the other way around and your dad wasn't telling Bob Martin, if you have any problems from her, call me.
Absolutely. But yeah, several of the buildings at Eastern were named for people that my father was friends with when he was at Eastern. The Combs building, you know, he was friends with them, and I can't remember now some of the others, but he would point them all out and say that was so-and-so, and, you know, friends from Prestonsburg and Middlesboro and all over the state, you know, while Dad was there. So we kind of felt like we had a legacy there to begin with.
Yeah, and you mentioned you lived on campus, Lucy. What dorm did you live in when you were on campus?
I was in Case Hall my freshman year, and that's the year the tornado of '74 came through in the spring. We were stupid. We were all up on the sunroof watching for the tornado, and when we saw it hit the power plant on the edge of campus and sparks went flying, that's when we went to the basement. And then my sophomore and junior year, I lived in McGregor, and Sarah Price was the house mother there. And Sarah Price happened to be from Erlanger, which is where I'm from. So it was nice because in the summer when I would move home, Sarah would let me store a lot of my belongings that I did not need at home over the summer in the basement of McGregor, so that I didn't have to haul it home and haul it back, like refrigerators and, you know, a big trunk full of blankets and those things.
What about you, Brian? Did you live on campus?
Just 1 year in Todd Hall, and then I moved down to the Rick's Bike Shop apartment fall of '77 when I started working for Jack, and lived there for a couple of years, and then down on 3rd Street toward Montello's for the next 4 years after that.
You know, we talked a little bit about some food places earlier, and I don't know if it was open when you guys were here, but there was a place down on Water Street that would have been almost right across from the Dog that was like an old-time burgers place, and they had the stools that you could spin on, and I can't remember the name of it. I want to say it was Dairy something.
I think it ended up being Joe's Pizza.
Joe's Pizza?
Yeah, that's what it ended up being in '77, because one of my roommates worked there and one worked at Archie's.
Archie's, yeah.
Dan, I think you were right. It was Dairy Whip.
Dairy Whip. I feel like at one time there was Dairy something. I can remember going there to eat. Mm-hmm. And there was a pizza. I want to say there was a pizza spot on 3rd Street. Maybe that's what I was getting confused earlier. Was that Archie's? Was that where it was?
Archie's was down on Main Street across from, like right next to the A&P, the grocery store there, right past the parking lot there.
Yeah.
Right before you got to Madison Street.
And so there wasn't an Andy's Pizza?
I don't remember that.
And again, my memory is not great. I was very young back then, and so I don't remember everything.
A couple of people are commenting I was wrong. It was Dairy Cheer, not Dairy Whip. Dairy Cheer.
Dairy Cheer. Yep, that's exactly right. Dairy Cheer. And, of course, Ma Kelly's. I assume Ma Kelly's was open.
Absolutely. Ma's was the place to go. And, of course, the raggedy clothes you could wear and not putting on your makeup for the girls or whatever, as the worse you can look, the cheaper your meal was, because Ma felt sorry for you. And when she'd walk around the table, if you looked poor and disheveled, she didn't charge you much. If you got all made up, your meal cost more. So we made sure and get. Go ahead, Brian.
If you were a big guy, your meal was more expensive just because you were big. And then after I left school and was starting to work down on the Kentucky River at where Pier 99 used to be, there was a restaurant, and Ma's son, Junior, and his wife, Ann, would come in there and eat every Saturday night. They'd call me and say, we're on our way, and they wanted all their food on the table, salad, steaks, everything, and their beers already on the table when they walked in.
When you guys, was your main mode of getting around back then walking? Did a lot of the students walk, or by then was everybody driving?
No, I was walking.
We walked almost everywhere. I had a car. From the time I came down there, but parking was such a premium. Freshman year, we were only allowed to park up by Alumni Coliseum. Freshmen had to park all the way up there, and so walking down the hill and up to by the football stadium, and then walking all the way down the hill to Case Hall. Once you found a parking spot, you just left it. You didn't move your car. Of course, the parking lots that were close to McGregor and close to Telford, those were for faculty during the week. So we weren't allowed to park there during the week. You could park there on weekends, but they were reserved for faculty during the week. So usually if you found a parking spot, you just left it. You left your car was basically, now we did use our vehicles because there was a truck stop that was out on the old, and I think it's 25. It was no longer on 75, so it wasn't, it wasn't being used by trucks anymore. But one night a week, they had all you could eat spaghetti, meatball, salad, and garlic bread. So we would all load up in the cars and go out there and get our fill for the week, especially when we were low on money and didn't have a lot to spend on our food. We'd all go out to the truck stop and fill up on all you can eat spaghetti night.
Last night they talked a little bit about some places, the place that eventually became the Maverick Club, that was out on East Main, I believe, or something, maybe called the Barn or the Red Barn. Do you guys remember that, or was it?
Oh, yeah, the Red Barn. And that's the Red Barn also is where a lot of the sororities and fraternities would have their dances. Like I said, I was a little sister to Delta Upsilon, they lost their charter there, but after I graduated. But we would have our socials, our fall dance and our spring formals and whatever out at the Red Barn.
Yeah,
you could rent it out.
Brian, what'd you say?
It was the Maverick Club when I started school. And it started getting a little rougher.
Well, let's get back to Poopeotzie's as we start to close down a little bit here. We're getting close to the end of the hour. Looking back, what do you think, what were some of the reasons that attracted a crowd and brought people in? What were some of the things that made Poopeotzie's one of those special places that people remember?
Affordability, and it was the first bar to sell T-shirts. He was telling me Sunday he sold 52 gross, which is like 8,000 shirts over the years he was there. And then he was the first bar to start doing that. He engraved the bottom of the mugs so he'd catch people trying to fill for them. And once a year or so, he'd go to the fraternity houses and have their president go through and get all his mugs back for him. Like, you know, they're my mugs.
I think the other thing too is there was never any trouble in there.
No.
If anybody got to be a mean drunk or whatever, Jack threw him out, or he had the managers throw him out. So you were safe there. Everybody got along and knew that if anybody was getting mouthy or getting out of control, they were going to be politely escorted out the door and then banned for a while. And if you wanted back, you had to beg forgiveness of Jack. And basically promise him your firstborn child or whatever to be allowed back in. So everybody knew that there was no nonsense in there. You didn't have to worry about any kind of trouble going on in Poopeotzie. So everybody felt safe.
Now, the first time I was in there, I was out of high school, but I was going to community college in Ashland for a year, dictation. And they were playing the state high school basketball tournament, girls basketball tournament at Eastern. And we used to really cheer with her. So while she went to go warm up, we went down to Poops. And I walked right into 17 and got served. I'm like, I'll go to school here. And I was 50 real quick. Now, I'd been going to Huntington for a few years, 3 or 4 years already. So I knew how to handle myself in a ball game. So I was like, this is be where I go to school at.
Yeah, well, and you said that there was never any trouble, Lucy. I'm sure some of Brian's football buddies being there and keeping things in order also helped keep the crowd under control and keep people from acting up.
I remember one particular night, my freshman year, he was either a junior or senior football player from New Jersey. His name was Joe Alvino, and somebody got a little bit mouthy, and Joe literally picked them up by the two arms and walked them out the door and set them down and said, "Not in here."
Yeah, I knew Joe too.
Yeah, they didn't want their establishment, their place to hang out, to be any trouble. So, and we also didn't want the cops called, because that was asking for trouble. So they made sure there was no trouble, so they didn't have to be law enforcement there.
Well, you guys, it's been a lot of fun, and we're coming to the end of the hour. Any final thoughts or anything that you'd like to mention? Anything that we didn't hit or we didn't get into tonight?
No.
I just say that my years at Eastern were the best 4 years of my life, and I still say that to this day. I've had a good life. I've had a great career. I'm now retired, even though I have some part-time jobs. I have a wonderful family, wonderful husband, wonderful son and grandkids. But bar none, my best 4 years of looking back were my 4 years at Eastern. And the nightlife was part of it. It wasn't all of it, but it was part of it, because that's where we all got to know each other intimately and make our great friends that I still have today.
Yeah, I still have quite a few too. The Good Time Dudes, which range from Tom Feldman to Richard Tussey. There's like 20 of us go camping together once a year still. Met my wife there. So, I'm still visiting EKU on a daily basis, and learned a lot, had a lot of fun at the same time. Really enjoyed myself there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's the great end of the story. Not only did you have a great time, but you also walked out of here with degrees and an education, and were able to use that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. And that's, at the end of the day, that's the good news and the moral of the story. Everybody had a good time and nobody got hurt.
That's correct.
Yep.
That's correct.
Brian, Lucy, I can't thank you enough for sharing your memories tonight and being with us. I think it's been a blast, and you've educated me and brought back some memories of Richmond that I had even forgotten about. And it's been a good time, and I hope you guys enjoyed being with us.
It was fun. Thanks, Dan.
Appreciate it, Dan.
All right. Lucy Riffle, Brian Hotchkiss, thank you all. Appreciate it. And thank you for watching. We are wrapping up our first hour of tonight's pub crawl as we are journeying back to the 1970s. And we're going to continue that discussion in just a few minutes, but we're going to change our tone a little bit. And we'll continue to talk about some of those downtown places, but also talk about the magic moment. We got Willie Joe Covington, who has been operating that establishment for 60 years now. And we're going to talk about Zanzibar and Larkins and all kinds of different places. So it's going to be a good second hour. We hope that you will join us and stay with us. I do want to remind you, if you're watching tonight, we do have t-shirts available. They have logos from all the different places that we've been talking about tonight. And also it has Eternal Colonel Pub Crawl on the front. You can get those. And we also would like for you to check in and let us know where you are watching from tonight. You can do all of this at alumni.eku.edu/pubcrawl. So please go there so that we make sure that we have a record of your watching tonight and participating. And we appreciate all the folks who made comments and who checked in tonight, asked questions, and you will continue to have the opportunity to do that when we venture into the second hour. We're going to be joined by Willie Joe Covington, Howard Miller, and Robert Blythe when we begin our second hour. We are going to give you a break, let you have a chance to take care of some business for a couple of minutes, grab another drink, run to the restroom, and then hopefully you will come back and join us for our second hour as we do the Eternal Colonel pub crawl, and we go back in time, the 1970s. We will continue with part 2, and that'll be coming up in just a few moments. Stay with us. Welcome back for our second hour. Tonight we are journeying back with the Eternal Colonel pub crawl to the 1970s. And for those of you who were with us in our first hour, we appreciate it. We talked with Brian Hotchkiss and Lucy Riffle about their experiences at EKU and Poopeotzie's and the Bear and the Bull and Dirty Ernie's and some of those places. And tomorrow night, I want to go ahead and give you a little preview. Tomorrow night will be 1980s night on the pub crawl, and we've got 2 hours scheduled for you tomorrow night. The first hour will feature a look back at the Dog, maybe one of the most classic, along with Specs, downtown spots over the years. And we will have Morgan Robinson Varney. Morgan is the daughter of Robbie and Jean Robinson, who were the owners of the Family Dog. We'll have Jeff Gillum, who was a bartender at the Family Dog and went on to own a couple of his own night spots around Richmond and now is still operating Gillum's here in town. And David Embry, who is a manager at the Dog, the Top Dog, Paco's, and we'll get into all that and talk about all those places. And then we're lucky to have Billy Luxon, who was with us last night, who has agreed to come back tomorrow night in the second hour, and he's going to talk about Sutter's, Jay Sutter's Mill. And we'll also touch on some of the other spots. O'Reilly's, as was mentioned in the last hour, and some of the other places that were big downtown. We'll talk about it all tomorrow night, so we hope you can join us for that. Again, I want to remind you we have T-shirts to commemorate this event, Eternal Colonel Virtual Pub Crawl T-shirts, and we also would like for you to check in and let us know that you are watching tonight. You can do all of that, find the shirts, and check in at alumni.eku.edu/pubcrawl. Go there and please check in and let us know that you're tuned in tonight. And also, as you're watching tonight on Facebook Live, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have memories that you would like to share or like to have the panelists tonight answer those questions, feel free to put those in the chat. And we've got folks who are passing those along to us, and we will do our best to try to get to as many of the questions as we can. Our second hour tonight is going to be a little different than the first. We are going to focus a little bit more on some of the nightlife opportunities for people of color who were at school at EKU in the 1970s. So we've got some great hosts and some people who have some great memories and know a lot about things that were going on back then. And so I think we're going to have a really good second hour, and it's going to be informative and also hopefully a little bit entertaining. I'll go ahead and start bringing our guests into the studio. First up, he has owned and operated and still owns and operates the Magic Moment on Orange Street here in Richmond. And 60 years or so that place has been going. Willie Jo Covington is with us here tonight. Willie Jo, good evening and welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing fine. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Also, he played keyboards for the Techniques. Our next guest did, and not a lot of people know that about him. They know he can play the piano, and they've seen him play, but he was back in the day a keyboard player for a band called the Techniques, which was one of the most popular bands back in the 70s. He is also an EKU alum from 1971 and has also been a professor at EKU and has been associated with this university for a long, long time. And that is Reverend Robert Blythe, who currently is serving as the mayor of Richmond as well. There he is. Mayor Blythe, good evening and welcome to the show.
Good evening, Dan. Good to be with you.
Good to have you. And I'm hoping our third guest has got arranged and got set up now. He was having a little bit of technical issues, but our third guest tonight was a member of the EKU football team from 1972 to 1975, and someone that certainly knows a lot of people around town here in Richmond, Howard Miller. So I'm hoping, Howard, are you with us yet? There he is. We call him Cuz. Looks like he's still getting situated. And come on, Cuz, get on camera. We're not going to talk to your wife, although we'd much rather talk to Gladys sometimes. Hi, Gladys.
You did. Hey, can you hear me, Dano?
Yeah, we got you, Cuz. How you doing?
Okay. Hey, Reverend Blythe, how you doing, buddy?
Fine, sir. Fine. Good to see you. Hey, Gladys.
Joe, how you?
Fine. How you doing, Howard?
I guess by now you guys can tell that Gladys is my engineer and all of that above. So I'm trying to get back in here and get situated.
All right. Well, we're just glad you made it.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So I like to start each one of these segments with kind of three things I want to do in this segment. And so here are kind of the three things that I'd like for us to get done in the next hour. First, I definitely want to talk about the Magic Moment. It's kind of one of those iconic places that have a great reputation and part of the lure of EKU and Richmond over the years. Second, I want to talk about some of the other spots. There were some other places that folks like to go, and you guys certainly know about that more than I. And then third, I want to talk a little bit about your all's experiences at EKU and what it was like being a student here in your day back in the 70s. So those are the kind of the three main discussion areas I want to get into tonight, but we're going to start with the Magic Moment. And Willie, I got to start with you, Willie Joe, because you have been, tell us about how it started and when it started.
Magic Moment started about 55 or 60 years ago. And I've been there ever since, and I'm still there. And it's got great memories. I met a lot of interesting people, and I've enjoyed it. And
you've been in the same spot on Orange Street since it opened.
Same spot.
And you still have events there on weekends, or still open it up on weekends?
Well, I haven't been open since March right now, but I've still open on weekends. Yes.
Yeah. And one of the things that's been interesting to me is, as we've prepped for these shows and talked, you actually, like many people, kind of got your start at Specs. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I worked for Spec when I was about 14 years old. And Spec took me. In fact, he built a Magic Moment for me.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And over the years, you have, a lot of folks, and you told me when we talked earlier, a lot of the folks still who went there as a student still come back when they come in for homecoming.
Well, every year, homecoming, I have a board. And every student that went to school back in the 60s, those that are living, they sign it. They come back every homecoming. We have what you call EKU oldie nights and alumni nights. So I miss those days.
Yeah, well, and obviously right now, a lot of places aren't able to open like we all wish and hope they could, and maybe eventually we'll be able to get back to being able to get together in person. And that's why we're doing what we're doing tonight via this platform. Robert, let's talk a little bit about the techniques. And a lot of people may not know that about you, but back in the day, you were the keyboard player for the techniques, right?
Well, yes, I was one of them. Actually, Randy Black was the first keyboard player. Then we decided to add a keyboard. And my primary role was as manager, though. But I did a great deal of the playing also.
Yeah, and so tell me, for folks who don't know, tell me a little bit about the techniques and how you all got started and where you played. And because I've heard the band was one of the most popular in the area back in the day.
Well, I'm glad that's the reputation. I was not originally a part of that group band. There were about 4 or 5, maybe 6 guys who had gotten together, and they rehearsed in a place that's no longer here, but was extremely important in the lives of a lot of young people of our community. It was called the Race Street Community Center. And the folks who ran the center allowed these little fellas to come when they were not open and to do their practicing. Well, one day, and this was early 70s, one day I went by to listen to them practice. They had a job scheduled, I believe it was for that evening or the next day. But those fellas argued so much that they couldn't get any practicing done. So I told them, what you need is a manager. So they looked at me and said, well, why don't you be our manager? And I said, I'm sorry, I really don't have time right now in my schedule to do that. They said, well, why don't you be our manager until we can find one? Dan, have you ever fallen for that?
I'm afraid I have.
I tell you, that happened to me on EKU's campus when I was the faculty advisor for the FCA. And then the guys said, well, we don't have a faculty advisor. We got to have one. They said, so will you be our advisor until we can find one? So they found one 7 years later. Literally 7 years. But so I told the guys, I'll help you as much as I can and help them with some music and that kind of thing, and just trying to keep them on task. And that was early 70s. And we were together. I was with them till early 80s.
Yeah. Howard, one thing I want to talk to you about, and this is something that a lot of people don't know or may not realize, but you were a football player, so you were running with a lot of the athletes, a lot of the football guys, and you guys would go down to the Dog or to Specs or whatever was open at that time, maybe Poopeotzie's, and have a good time. And then you continued the party after they closed. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the way it was back then. What you smiling about, Joe? Well, and see, that was a part of the landscape that a lot of people didn't realize, because in a sense, there was a limited crossing, let's say, of borders. We would go down to put it this way. When we left O'Donnell Hall, when we went out as a group, the ball players, we went out together, we stayed together, and we came back together. So when we went to Poopeotzie's, if we went to the Family Dog, when they closed down, then it wasn't like the white guys would go on back to the dorm. No, they would come with us. And then we would go down to the Moment or the Diamond Lodge or wherever, and they realize, hey, the night is still young. And one of the reflections I used to hear the guys say is how comfortable they felt when they came down to the Moment. Joe did an excellent job of making those guys welcome, letting them know, you at home right here. And so we went from the 12 o'clock shutdown of the places downtown to our side of town where the party was just starting, in a sense.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that people may not remember. And obviously, the 1970s were a lot different than things are today. And I didn't know how much people of color, I didn't know if they did go down to the Dog and into places like that, and if that was something that was, if the two groups mixed, like you said, and went back and forth to the different establishments.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me put it this way. The 70s was that first decade after our country's civil rights movement. This was the first decade after that movement that literally changed the landscape of our country. Now, I firmly believe that there was no place like our college and university campuses that during that initial decade after the civil rights movement, it was our college and university campuses that brought millions and millions of Blacks and whites together like no other environment. And yes, we went to the Family Dog and Hoops and places, you know, because the classroom and the campus was designed for one thing. But it was the coming together of all of these individuals that were gathered on these college and university campuses. It was the magic moments, the Family Dogs, the Poopeotzes, and places like that all across the country where the actual merging of people came together. You shared the classroom and all of that, but it was these spots and places where we really came together and got to know each other.
Yeah, Joe, I would assume that Magic Moment, predominantly your crowd and your audience there were the people of color, but the other students, when they came, felt it was a welcoming place.
Oh yeah, everybody's welcome. I mean, we didn't look at color or nothing. We just there and we had a wonderful time. Can I say one other thing, please?
Absolutely.
At that particular time, Reverend Blythe had the techniques. We also had a group called the Dynamic Soul 7, and we played behind Jimmy, the Exiles. We did a show with Lionel Richie and the Commodores, and we was back in the day too. I wanted to mention that. So
you were in that band?
I was a manager, like Reverend Blythe.
All right. Now, and speaking of such, Willie, you had some pretty big name acts over the years that have been through the Magic Moment, right?
All right, yes. Cool in the Gang, Peaches and Herb, Daryl Dawkins,
Little Roger.
Roger Troutman, the coach for the Celtics. I forget, Garfield Smith brought him in my club one night, and I forget his name, but he was there.
Wow.
So
it's known everywhere, not just here.
right. It's all over.
Let's talk a little bit about some other places too. I know that a place that I keep hearing about was the Zanzibar. Is that what it was called, Zanzibar?
Well, at first it was the Zanzibar. Then after the Zanzibar, I made it into the Magic Moment. The Zanzibar.
Okay, so Magic Moment was the Zanzibar. It's the same place?
No. Zanzibar was first, then the Magic Moment.
Okay. And same area over there?
Same area, same place.
And Howard, when you and I talked before, you had mentioned a spot that was over on Hill Street that a lot of the students would go to where they would eat. But in the evening, it kind of became a little bit more of a pub type spot.
Larkins.
Larkins, yes.
Yeah. You know, Willie Joe and Reverend Blythe can back me up on this, or might be someplace other. I would be willing to say, other than our churches, the Magic Moment, Larkins, and my brother's barber shop are probably three of the most well-known landmarks that during that period of time that the students that came in and out of Richmond, those are probably three of the more identifiable locations that existed. Miller's Barbershop, Larkin's Restaurant, and The Moment. I would say, though, what do you guys think? I mean, I believe those are probably three of the main landmarks.
I think you're right. Just as there are students I run into, or former students, who now ask if I'm, for example, in another town or something, and they came to Richmond for some reason, the first thing they'll ask, is the dog still there? Well, just as folks would ask, is the dog still there? Folks ask me about Miller's Barbershop. They'll ask me about the Magic Moment, Larkins, because they could eat. And of course, as you said, later in the day, it became, it was just a dance place. because a lot of kids still dance. But those are the things folks still ask about, who've been away from here for years, but they still want to know if those three places are around.
Well, and one thing, I know those three places in particular were very popular with the local folks. A lot of local folks went there. And so when the college students would come in and go there, did the crowds mix well? Did the local folks welcome those people in?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, indeed. In fact, many of those students, I think the other two will agree, many of those students, because they made such a great connection with the people of Richmond, as Joe said, his place was welcoming. And a lot of students being away from home found that to be the place where they knew they could go. They'd be safe, they'd be treated right, folks would enjoy their company. And I think the students mixed well, the Richmond residents mixed well with each other. And that's one of the reasons I believe they want to come back now and look up folks that they knew when they were here. That's why now, if there's some student, former student who's deceased or having some difficulties, they make sure the people of Richmond know because of the connections that were made back in those days. I have a fellow right now in Leesburg, Florida, calls me Papa. He came to our church the whole time he was here. He and some other guys in Atlanta and in Florida, they expect me when I come through. In fact, I just recruited the daughter of one of those fellas to come here to play on one of our athletic teams next year. So, I mean, they liked Richmond, they loved Richmond, knew Richmond loved them, and they maintain that connection now in the next generation, which is awesome.
Now, am I right? Did he wear number 4? Sheldon?
Yes, Sheldon. Sheldon's daughter is a Florida State volleyball champ, and she's coming to EKU next year.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome.
Yes, indeed.
Well, and I think we see that, and we see it certainly in my job a lot at Eastern. There's so many folks who came and had a great experience at EKU, and they want their kids. You know, you never want to force your kids to go somewhere, but inside they're all hoping that their kids end up coming and picking Eastern too. And so I know that's got to make Sheldon very happy. That
it does. It really does.
I think one of the things that really enhanced a lot of the relationships back then was that there was a lot of families that a lot of the students wind up next to being adopted by. I mean, families where students would on Sunday evenings and even during the week, they knew that they could always find a good hot meal, a good family to welcome them in and treat them, just as Reverend Blythe said, just like family. And it wasn't just a random thing. This was a commonplace. There was guys that come to Richmond. You guys remember Goose?
Yes.
Remember Grog? When Chester, sometimes get Chester Rose to tell you about some of his experiences as far as coming to Richmond and being welcomed in by families and always being able to have a safe haven. Teddy Taylor, you couldn't have blown Teddy Taylor out of Richmond after he got into this town, and he embraced Richmond. Richmond embraced him. And there's a lot of guys, man, if you could just hear some of the stories that some of the guys tell of their experience, it's really amazing.
Well, and you know, that was really, and this was a little bit later, but Coach Kidd and the football team really adopted that adoption type program. And I know a lot of the guys that played here in the 80s in particular, when the NCAA would still let you do that kind of thing.
Yes.
They had a formalized program where they kind of adopted a lot of the families here in Richmond, adopted those guys. And they still call those, you know, I think Danny Copeland still calls Sue Ramsey mom, you know, because she kind of adopted him. And the same is for Myron and the Riggses, Myron Guyton and J&D Riggs when they were here.
Yeah.
I mean, there were so many stories of that.
You know, Howard and Dan. Yeah, just quickly though.
Yes.
That's a sentimental moment for me, Howard, because my mother who worked.
I can't.
in the
Your
alumni-
volume. Can you turn your volume up a little bit?
Dan, can you hear me?
Yeah. We'll try to, cuz we'll give you your hearing aids.
Okay, go ahead.
Now, any better?
There you go. That's better.
Oh, that's a sentimental moment, I was saying, Howard, for me, because my mother, who worked when Coach Kidd was there, she worked in the laundry in the Coliseum.
Okay.
And a lot of those, and for her, there were kids. A lot of those kids knew they could come down and talk to her. Well, she actually, as you said, adopted a couple of them, and they knew, for example, Sunday dinner. They knew they would have Sunday dinner with our family, and I think that program was so effective because again, those kids were away from home, but they knew they had a family away from home, and there, of course, now, as you said, there's still those who will maintain their communication.
Yeah. And just like you could leave it to the NCAA to take a good thing and find a way to mess it up and ruin it. Willie Joe, I think you were trying to say something a second ago.
Yes, I was just going to say that Wally Chambers, he was my best friend. No. I have his Rookie of the Year card when he made Rookie of the Year with the Chicago Bears. And Wally was just like a bouncer for me. I mean, all he'd have to say one word and it was over. I mean, that was it. And Coach Taylor, Sidney Rudell, I can go on and on. Like Howard said, we were just one lovely family, and we got along good. We treated people good.
I remember as a freshman, Dano, we had curfew, and we was all at that time. Remember how Miss Sarah Estel had Larkin's place at that time. They called it Sarah's place there on Hill Street. And I was a freshman. And so it got close to curfew time. And Wally and Mike Nicholson, they gathered us all up, everybody, it was 2 or 3 carloads of us. They saw to it that we all made it in for curfew. And so Wally and Nick was scheming in the front seat. And I knew they was going to sneak back out. And so I said, will y'all let me come back out with you? And so, we'll holler for you. And I'm sitting there in my window looking out, and I see them running across the yard, getting in the car. And I said, I thought we was teammates. I'm upset. But Joe hit the nail on the head. There was something special about, all of the guys. But Wally Chambers was a very, very special man. He was a very warm-hearted guy. You wouldn't have believed that the way you saw his intensity on the football field. But Wally Chambers was a very, very special man. Very special man.
Yes, and we just lost Wally in the last couple of years, and a great loss. And every time I saw Wally when he came back to campus, he could not have been nicer and kinder, and would talk to everybody and anybody who wanted. And of course, everybody remembers Wally Chambers, and a lot of people wanted to see him and talk to him. And he could not have been any more understanding and just very nice and accommodating for everybody.
I mean, I remember when we, I could tell stories, man, all night, but I remember when I first met Wally, I was behind Wally as a freshman. So during that period of his senior year, we probably had professional scouts from every NFL team to come in looking at him. Every practice, we had scouts. And he handled it all so well and never forgot who he was. And just a great guy.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the other folks, some of the other places that students, particularly students of color, like to go to when they came to Richmond, and when other places I think that were welcoming of them. And I think, Howard, you mentioned that a lot of people used to eat at the Elks Lodge back in the day.
Well, the Diamond Lodge used to be open and operating and had probably, what would you guys say? Probably some of the best fried chicken in Central Kentucky, man.
Folks would line up for it.
That's exactly right. I mean, because
Line up.
again, a lot of, just like with the Diamond Lodge, there was a certain time that they started cooking chicken. And it wasn't late, but it was late enough to where you could leave someplace else and know you can go up there and really get some good hot chicken. And it was special. Absolutely special.
You know, we've talked last night and a little bit in our first segment about Ma Kelly's. And, you know, I know we talked about Larkins and some other places, but is Ma Kelly's something that you guys remember and somewhere that you guys visited as well?
I used to work with Ma Kelly's son when I was a policeman. And like the young lady said, if you didn't have money or nothing, she would give you a dinner. She just a person that would give you anything that you wanted. If you didn't have it, she would give it to you.
And that again was a part of the landscape of that particular period of time. And I think the walls stood for what she represented, because she had signatures. You couldn't tell what color the wall was for all the signatures that people that frequented her business, everybody was welcome to sign their name on the wall. You couldn't tell what color the wallpaper was.
Robert and Cuz, let's talk a little bit about your time as students at EKU. And I always like to ask people about their EKU experience. And everyone has a different EKU experience. But in particular, you know, how was your experience as a person of color coming? And I don't know, are you both Richmond natives, or did you both come to Richmond from somewhere else?
Been Richmond
Robert,
all
you're a
my life.
Richmond native. Yeah.
Richmond native.
Same. Both of you. So it was a little bit probably easier transition for you because you had grown up here and been around the campus your whole lives.
Yeah. And I lived at home, but I was on campus quite a bit. In fact, when I was a freshman, I believe, I got into serious trouble one night. You know, we'd hang out in the dorms, in the lobbies, and talk. I mean, talk all night long about the topics of the day. Just talk. And I remember I got home after midnight one night, and my mother was waiting, and she said, "Where have you been?" I said, "I've just been on campus, you know, just talking." And she said, "Are you on drugs?" I mean, and Howard, you remember, the parents would ask that in those days, pretty much knowing you weren't. But I mean, if you just did anything like stay out late at night, you know, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that I was on campus quite a bit, and that, you know, that was that time. That was the way I enjoyed more of the campus experience.
Yeah.
I know for me, and being on an athletic scholarship, you know, again, as I said, the 70s was that first decade after the civil rights movement. And going to Easton and having the opportunity to play for Coach Kidd, whom a lot of people might not realize it, but Joe and Reverend Blythe knows that Coach Kidd coached at Madison High School.
Yes.
And before he left Madison High School, he was already a legendary coach to the parents of the players that he coached during the 60s, during the civil rights movement. I remember, Joe, Reverend Blythe, remember how the elders of the community used to sit on the steps of the old Masonic Lodge building across from the church. My grandfather, Mr. Utstone, you remember those guys? They used to sit there And they used to tell stories. They used to talk about this guy at Madison that was treating the young men right. He was treating them right. And so when I started Eastern, I had all of this information in my head about this guy that had already reached legendary status. And so when I got to Eastern, man, I was wide open as far as the experience. And it was different for me because as many talented athletes that had came through Madison High School, there hadn't been yet any minority that had gone to the next level and played college football. So as much as it was a great experience, it was a challenge because I didn't have nobody to call up and talk to. I didn't have nobody that had been there and done that. And so as it was the greatest experience of my life because it literally for me was a fulfillment of a plan that I had put together when I was in probably the 3rd or 4th or 5th grade. Because it was then that I had met some of Eastern's football players that played softball. Joe, you guys remember the old softball, the
Right.
fast pitch league used to be at Madison High School. Harold Estel had a team. My father played with Madco. You remember those? You guys
Coach
remember
Kidd.
those.
Coach Kidd.
And Coach Kidd, Larry Marmee, Dave Neff, Kenny Goodhue, Herb Conley,
Ted
Mike Smith.
Sizemore.
Those guys played with my father in that softball league. So I got to know some of the athletes early on. That was the first place I ever saw a EKU E-Club ring, the Letterman's ring. And it just as a kid to me, to have met those guys early on and have this idea, one day I want to do that. So when I went to Eastern, it was a God-sent blessing, you know.
I assume that you lived in O'Donnell.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't need any stories about O'Donnell Hall for sure.
I'm not going to tell you none.
Yeah. It's kind of like Vegas. What happened at O'Donnell stays at O'Donnell. We don't need to know.
Man.
But let me ask you this, because you both being local students coming to Eastern, how do you think the experience was different for those who were not from Richmond who came in? Do you think they had a vastly different experience than you guys did because you already had a comfort area and a comfort level? Or do you think they were able to come in and adjust just as easily?
I think many of them were able to make the adjustment. And I think one of the places that we can see that to be true, I think Howard has mentioned several, the places that were in the Hill Street, Irvin Street area that also welcomed the students. But in that day, Dan, many of the students who had a church background went to church here. It's not the same now, but in those days, and that's where many of the students made the connections that lasted and have lasted all these years. Our church always gets calls and letters and just hear from or hear about some of those students, but they made that connection there, and many of them will remind me of that. Sheldon's connection, for example, was made. It was made when Reverend Goodloe, right, Howard? Reverend Goodloe,
Yes, sir.
And not then I came along later, but they made that connection then. That there was a group of fellas. One of them had a car, so because of their backgrounds, that one that had the car, unless the football team was out of town for a game on Saturday night, those fellas were in Richmond, even if they had a game in Richmond. But Sunday morning, they were in somebody's church. So they maintained that connection, and they were well grounded because well, we I don't have to go there, but they were well grounded.
Right.
And I think that's part of what kept them connected. Many of the students who come now don't have that kind of connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
I
and why do you
remember-
think that is? Just a second, Howard. Why do you think that it's different now for the kids that come in?
I think they come in with a different attitude.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're not, and this is something that's happening throughout the country, and if they don't have, families are different. Howard talked about family. Families are different these days. The whole education process is different in some ways. We knew you'd better get your education. Today, it's like, kids, whatever. Well, what are you going to do? Juniors and seniors in high school. Well, what do you want to do? I don't know, but I think it's a different student.
Yeah.
And with family situations and with kids where they live, maybe not having those kinds of relationships with the church or with the community club or whatever, maybe even a place like Joe's where they could go and know they be safe and hang out with folks without all the other stuff that we're seeing in the news these days, the guns and all that kind of thing. It's a different day. And I think in that day, there was still more of the basics that were important in life.
Yeah.
Nowadays, we're missing out on so many of the basics.
Yeah.
I can remember on Sunday mornings, I can remember there would be groups of students walking toward church, coming down the hill. There would be South Collins Street or whatever, coming from toward campus. It might be 8, 10, 15, 20 people in a group.
That's right.
Walking to church on Sunday mornings. And then you would see them in a group walking back toward campus after church. Now, remember, at this particular time, freshmen were not allowed to have cars on campus.
That's right.
So that was somewhat of a molding process where people more or less turned to each other for, different types of things. And I think that was one thing that made a big difference then.
Yeah, Howard, I think that was part of the fun of the experience. Even the walking together, I think that was part of the fun.
Joe, I can remember times when a bunch of us and some of the guys on the football team had cars, but like Reverend Blythe just said, when the moment would close down, it might be 15 or 20 of us just lollygagging, just making our way back to campus, just enjoying the experience, enjoying being together. And that, again, was just a part of the landscape. You don't miss something that you've never had. So for those of us that didn't have an automobile or whatever, man, we had as much fun from the moment till we got to O'Donnell Hall as we did doing anything else.
Yeah. Well, obviously, campus was not as big as it is, back then. There were fewer students, and I think there was just maybe a tighter feeling of community. Back then.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's a thing that's hard to build. And once it gets away from you, it's hard to rein that back in and to get that again, no matter how big you get or how small you get. It's just, it's a culture thing. And it's one of those things that it's hard. You can't teach it. It's got to just kind of happen on its own organically.
Yes.
And I think it happened a lot more back then than it does today, for sure. Let's talk a little bit about campus, how it looks different. And, obviously you go on campus today, it doesn't look anything like back when you guys were in school. And you guys have been around Richmond forever, so you've seen it just change. What are some things that you really, some big changes that you think today compared to back then?
few days ago, well, several days ago, EKU very proudly cut the ribbon on its Veterans and Military Students Center. It's a part of the Powell Center now. Now, I'm still on your question. I had the joy, Howard, Joe, I had the joy of telling the congressman and some of his aides, we're standing in the end zone of the old stadium. Y'all remember that?
Right.
Mhm.
And I tell him at the other end, where the Wallace building is located, that was the other end zone. And that's the building where I taught for 18 years. But I said, we're standing in the field. And if you will look over, I told them, you'll notice how the hill lends itself to bleachers. I said, that's where the bleachers were.
Yep.
And of course, guys, remember, you can't even talk about Todd and Dupree now because they're no longer there.
Yeah.
And that's a massive change for me from 1967, and then not having Todd and Dupree there and not having that street open anymore.
Yeah.
That's really a change.
That's a big
But
impact.
you'll have to agree that the rec center that is now there is beautiful. I mean,
State of the art. State of the
and
art.
the whole plaza there with the renovated PAL and the new dining hall and the rec center, and you got the meditation chapel right in the middle. I mean, it's it's perfect.
Oh, it's outstanding.
I remember old Hanger Stadium, Reverend Blythe,
Yes,
when right where the Wallace building is, that's where Coach Kidd and Sue Kidd live, right in that end zone where the Wallace building was. When we was kids, we would go up to old Hanger Stadium. There was a place under the fence that everybody in Richmond knew about. We would go under the fence, check everything out in the stadium. We would go across the street to Todd Hall, go up on the 11th floor. To us kids from Richmond, that was one of the tallest buildings in the world, we thought. We would literally hang in the stairwells and watch game day unfold in front of us, because back then, college football was a big thing.
Yes.
We would just enjoy watching everything from the 11th floor stairwell. Then by the time the team got ready to kick off and everything, we'd go back down, sneak back into the stadium, get our seat and watch the ball game. And it was just, that's the way it was.
Well, and back then that was a big deal because you couldn't sit in your living room and watch a dozen different games on a game day. Right now you can just sit in your living room. You don't ever have to get up and you can watch the best teams in the country play.
And that's one of the things with your question earlier about the college campus of today. See, back in our day, we literally had each other for entertainment. We had each other and each other's, for local guys, we had each other's families. But now, kids can push a few buttons and they can be in their dorm rooms doing a football game. They can be conversing with somebody in China, Australia, Japan, around the world. They can be engaged in conversations and things with people around the world. You talk about homes with 2-car garages. Some of the students has got 2 cars nowadays. They have so much more entertainment. But back when we was in school, there was no internet, no social media, cell phones. That was still Dick Tracy and all of that kind of stuff back then,
Well, and Willie Joe, I don't know if you've seen if that's changed how people attend like the moment in places. Back then, there weren't as many options and there weren't as many things for people to do. And over the years, do you think that played a role in maybe how the crowd there may have gone up or down.
Yeah, it's gone up and down. It's not like it used to be. The students, like they said, used to walk from campus. And when I get downtown, they'd be there waiting for me to open up and we'd have fun. But it's not like that now.
Yeah, well, and obviously, like Howard says, a lot of the students now are driving, and and it's obviously a different time, different day, and different world we're living in, particularly right now.
Right.
And it's been an interesting year, to say the least. 2020 has, and I think, and Howard and I have talked about this. I think part of why I wanted to do this tonight is because there are a lot of conversations that people have been having, and conversations that people need to be having about, similarities that we have, and talking about the things that we as people and as alumni have in common, and not so much time talking about the things that we are different on. And I think tonight's a good springboard for eventually down the road, we can do more things and do more programming like this. And a college campus, as Howard said, is a prime place for us to talk about these things and to learn from each other. And that was the great thing. I had hardly ever met a foreign student or anybody from another country until I came to Eastern, and it gives you that opportunity to mix with people who don't look like you, who don't, have the same background you do. And that's part of why I think it's great that people go to college.
Mm-hmm. That's it.
I think every student coming out of high school ought to at least give college a try. Just try it. Because I remember Coach Kidd telling me as an individual, because when I came out of high school, I was not a recruited football player. I mean, I played, he gave me the opportunity. But he said, I know a lot of times when you put an athlete in a group that you can learn from, and they can make you a better athlete. And it's the same thing with our high school students. You might not be the best student, but there's a chance that when you get on that college campus, Reverend Blythe's been there. When you get on that college campus, if you can find some like-minded individuals that are doing the same thing you're doing, trying to adjust, trying to make the best decision that they possibly can, and want to learn, you'll be surprised at how well you can do. Everybody ought to at least give it a try. Just give it a chance, and it might work for you, and it might not be as difficult as you might think the task would have been.
I think there are students who have found, young people who found themselves. I think you're right, Howard, who found themselves because coming from wherever they came from and coming to a college campus, meeting some new people, getting some new ideas, developing some aspirations for things that they may not have aspired to when they were at home because they were not exposed to them. Like you said about Todd and Dupree, something that simple, going to an 11th floor of a building. That's a new thing. I've never been that high off the ground before. Yes, I'm glad you clarified that. But we watched them build Commonwealth. Wow. Yes. I watched them build the Alumni Coliseum. I remember the day the beam fell, crushed that concrete truck, killed that man. I remember those things. Yeah. Wow. Yes. See, and I think, a lot of the kids, even that came to Joe's, I mean, they would meet people and wow. And maybe became what they did not realize they could become.
Joe, you remember some of those days that we'd be down there at the moment and your building wouldn't even hold the crowd. The street would just be peacefully full of people everywhere. And everybody just enjoying the moment, enjoying that time, that opportunity to just be together. The street be full of people.
Well, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to do this virtual pub crawl, because I've said for years, and as you guys know, when you come to college, not everything you learn in the classroom.
No.
That's right. You learn, you grow up, you become who you will be. A lot of it is from the stuff you do outside of the classroom and the friends you make and the people and the experiences you have. And that's all part of the college experience. And while people learn a lot while they're at EKU, most of the times when I run into alums, the first thing they'll talk about is, remember this place or that place or this thing that we did. That's what they remember. And they remember the education they got. That's instilled in them. But it's the memories of the people and the things they did while they were in college that stick with them.
Made all the difference in the world. I remember down at the Dog, Robbie and his wife, Jack Poopeotzie, those guys, they understood the role that their places was playing in the lives of individuals that was in and out of their places. And our hats should be off to the Joes, the Robbies and Jacks and all of those guys that understood that it was in their places where the threading of the fiber of the fabric this country was rewoven with occurred in their places. That's where that fiber was rethreaded, because coming out of the civil rights movement, we was in a rebuilding of this country's attitude. And that fiber was really put together by those students across the country in those clubs at nights over a cold glass of Coke.
Yeah. Thank you, Howard. That's well said. We're coming up on the end of the hour, guys. And again, I can't thank you enough for agreeing to do this tonight. And I've loved talking to you. And I just want to give you each an opportunity if you have any closing thoughts or anything. And we'll start, Willie Joe, with you. The Magic Moment obviously has made a big difference in a lot of people's lives, and a lot of people have some great memories there. And I appreciate you coming on tonight and sharing some about that.
I'm just glad to be here and enjoyed myself. Pastor Brian, Howard, I love everybody, and I try to do the right things in my club. I try to do the right things in the community. So thank you for having me.
We appreciate that. And Mayor Blythe, I know you mentioned when you were swearing in a couple of the regents at the last meeting, you have a long association with this university.
Yes, indeed. And let me tell you, one of the ways that it's culminated, let me just mention this, Howard kept making me think. My brother, Michael, now deceased, played for Roy Kidd at Madison High School. And as I said, my mother worked there in the laundry, among other things, at EKU and the Alumni Coliseum, did the football team uniforms. And Coach Kidd was a pallbearer at my brother's funeral, my brother Michael's funeral. But I think one of the ways this whole thing has culminated for me, let's go back to Sheldon. I don't know why I keep out to call him tonight, but Sheldon Walker, who played on the football team, calls me Papa. About 22, 23 years ago, because Sheldon and his then girlfriend, Casey, who was at Alston P, Sheldon came to our church, and Casey would come up a lot of the weekends and spend the weekend with him, and they would come to church together. They both graduated many years ago, and then 20 plus years ago decided to get married. Sheldon called me and asked if I would marry them. I said, well, I'd be honored. They said, because you've been our pastor the whole 4 years we were in Richmond. I was in Richmond, he said. So I said, sure. And they said, there's just one thing. Would you come to Florida to do it? Now, Joe, how many times people have to beg you to come to Florida? So I told him, sure. But here's the point. About 3 years ago, I went back to St. Simon's Island, Georgia, to renew their vows. Now, Sheldon and Casey have a son and a daughter. The son is playing football for Tulane. Sheldon calls me Papa. He sent me about a month ago a note that make anybody cry. And he said, Papa, I just want you to know that I love you because you are the only man who has been constant in my life. Okay. So I have to take care of the grandkids, his son, who is playing at Tulane, and his daughter, who will be coming up here with us. But I'm you have to forgive me for this, but I said, and she's a beauty. She is a beauty, and I said, you must begin telling her now to tell the little boys, my daddy has a gun. My daddy has a gun. And I told him that last week when he told me, he sent a picture of her when she was baptized. And I said, when he said, I've been telling her, you tell him my daddy has a gun. I said, and you also tell her to tell them that your papa does too. That's
Hey.
enough. That's enough. But
listen,
yeah,
the last
that's what
time
it means to me.
the last time I saw Sheldon, he looked like he was still in playing shape.
Yes, indeed. Still
He don't
looks
need a
like
gun.
some pictures sometime. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Howard, your final thoughts?
Well, I would just like to take this platform to say to the two gentlemen here, Dan, that in my days of growing up in Richmond, I can't think of anybody, that has been any more of an influence. Joe was always a guy that was involved in helping young people as far as us playing sports and making equipment available and out in the playground. We all grew up playing baseball, basketball, and football behind what is now Telford.
Right.
That's where the football field was. And guys like Joe and other guys in the community was always there working with us and helping us do the things that helped to put us in a position to be successful. And I don't think I have to even mention what Reverend Blythe has done and been in the lives of guys like myself that have gone into the ministry.
Thank you, Howard.
That individual that has always been there for whatever situations might occur where you need to be able to turn to someone that you know is going to tell you the right thing. Right. See, we live in a world now where people might tell you something, but it might not be the right thing.
Yeah.
And I can't think of any guys that have been more of an influence or a helpmate for me than Willie Joe and Reverend Blythe. And I thank you guys. Thank you guys for what you've done for me.
Thank you.
See if this shows. That's Sheldon and his son.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can see Sheldon's. Yeah, see, he still looks as solid as he did back when he played here.
See that, Howard?
Yeah. I see him.
I told him, I said, well, gee, that boy's about big enough to whip your head, ain't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sheldon's a fine young man. He was a great football player and a fine young man.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank all three of you. I've absolutely loved talking to you tonight. And if I had told somebody before that we're going to have two reverends on our pub crawl, they all would have been shocked to hear that. But you guys have been great. That's the daughter?
And that's the daughter. They love horses. She comes up for the Rolex event in Lexington. She
awesome.
The horses.
Hey, Papa gonna need a shotgun.
Listen, I told him.
Gonna need a shotgun. That's a beautiful young lady.
Tell them fellas, my daddy has a gun.
All right, gentlemen, our time is up. The hour is up. Willie Joe Covington, thank you. Robert Blythe, thank you. Howard Cuzmiller, thank you. It's been a true pleasure sitting with you guys tonight, and maybe we can do it again.
Pleasure's been mine. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Guys.
Thank you, Dan-O.
Thank you, Dan.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you very much. And I also want to thank you folks at home for watching us tonight. And hope you've enjoyed our discussion. Remember, we will be back tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. We'll start with the family dog tomorrow night, and that'll be our feature from 7 to 8. And then from 8 to 9, we'll talk about Jay Sutter's Mill with Billy Luxon. So please try to join us again tomorrow night. I also want to remind you, we'd love to hear from you. Check in if you have not yet. That's alumni.eku.edu/pub crawl. You can find one of our pub crawl t-shirts there and order that. And you can also check in and let us know that you were with us. We appreciate you being here. I am past my time, so I'm going to say good night. We hope to see you tomorrow night for the Eternal Kernel pub crawl from EKU. Good night.